Welcome back to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well informed. Today, we're plunging into something really exciting, I think, the promise of the green economy. And it's not just about, the planet, which is obviously huge. It's this monumental chance for economic growth, for innovation, for jobs. But here's the kicker, the big question. In this green gold rush, who actually benefits? Is it just the big industrial players, the ones already ahead? Or can other nations, maybe, seize this moment? So our mission for you today is to explore exactly that. How can middle-income countries, these economies at a really crucial stage, how can they actively participate and maybe more importantly, upgrade within these rapidly growing global value chains for renewable energy? We're going to unpack the strategies, the policies that can turn this potential into, well, a powerful reality for them. And this deep dive, it's built on some fascinating new research, a paper that looked at 12 middle-income countries, focusing on 3 key areas: solar PV, wind, and biomass power. It's really about finding those critical combinations, what actually works.
So consider this your fast track to understanding a vital, maybe often overlooked, part of the whole global green transition. You're about to get some surprising insights, I think, into how countries can climb that economic ladder, speed up their green shifts, and crucially, avoid being left behind, all without drowning in data. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, Yen. When we talk about green global value chains, what are we actually talking about? And why, according to the paper, is this field so, well, concentrated right now?
Yeah, it's a great starting point. And what's immediately striking, really, is that while green tech has just exploded, boomed over the last couple of decades, the supply side, it's heavily concentrated. You're talking the U.S., China, Western Europe mainly. And that's not just an observation, it's a real risk.
A risk? How so?
Well, it means the lion's share of the benefits, right, the economic stuff, social improvements, jobs, it could all just flow to those already industrialized countries.
Right. Leaving others behind.
Potentially leaving the global south, especially these middle-income countries, the MICs, playing catch-up. Or maybe not even getting in the game. But here's the interesting part, the twist. The very newness of these technologies. It might actually create a unique opportunity.
Ah, okay.
A green window of opportunity, as the paper calls it, for these MICs to potentially leapfrog.
Leapfrog, like skipping stages.
Sort of, yeah. Think about how South Korea or Taiwan did it in electronics, decades ago. They aren't fighting against deeply entrenched players in some old established industry. They're entering a space that's relatively fresh, still evolving fast.
That's a powerful idea then. A real chance for a different kind of economic development. Now, the paper, it simplifies these complex renewable energy GDCs, these global value chains, into 2 basic types. But they're connected. Can you walk us through those?
Absolutely. The research draws a really clear line here. First up, you have the manufacturing chain.
Okay. Making the stuff.
Exactly. Making the actual equipment. So designing it, producing it, assembling components like, say, solar panels, wind turbine blades, specific parts for biomass. This chain is usually led by the big original equipment manufacturers, the OEMs. Then second, there's the deployment chain.
Deployment.
Yeah.
So getting it out there.
Pretty much. Getting the technology from the factory door to the end user and then keeping it running. So that covers everything from the early financing, the project development itself, then the installation, the operations, the maintenance over years.
Right.
And these activities, they're often managed by project developers or what are called EPC firms, engineering, procurement, and construction.
Okay, so manufacturing and deployment. It sounds like they have really different vibes, different characteristics. What really stands out about those differences, and why does that matter for a country trying to get involved?
Oh, the differences are absolutely crucial because they basically shape where the opportunities are and, where the challenges lie.
Right.
Take deployment activities, for example.
Yeah.
Things like operating a wind farm, maintaining it.
Yeah.
The paper points out these can represent a pretty big chunk, sometimes 20, even 30% of a project's entire lifetime value.
Wow. Okay. That's significant.
It is. And here's the key bit. These activities are geographically sticky.
Sticky.
Meaning they're fundamentally tied to the physical location of the power plant. You can't, outsource the maintenance of a wind turbine in Brazil to somewhere in Asia. It has to happen there.
Right, you had to be on site.
Exactly. And this immobility, it's actually a huge potential advantage for local firms. Unlike, say, solar panels, which are highly tradable goods made anywhere, shipped globally, deployment creates inherent local job opportunities, local skill development. It stays put.
Okay, so that stickiness in deployment definitely sounds like a potential way in, a starting point. But the paper also draws this distinction between participation and upgrading. What's the real difference there, and why isn't just, joining the chain enough?
Ah, yes, this is such a critical point. Absolutely vital. Participation basically means getting your foot in the door, maintaining some kind of presence.
Like assembling parts.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe offering some basic services like transporting components for installation, just being involved somehow.
Right.
But upgrading, that's a whole different level. That's about enhancing your capabilities,
Yeah.
moving into higher value stuff.
Like designing components, not just assembling.
Precisely. Or developing more complex services, moving up the chain. And the paper is really clear on this. Just participating. It doesn't automatically mean you'll get access to those better, higher value bits. Lots of economies can just get stuck doing the low value assembly, the basic services, kind of like running on a treadmill.
Working hard but not moving up.
Exactly. It's not some automatic, benign escalator taking you to greater prosperity just because you're in.
Okay, so if a middle-income country wants to avoid that treadmill, wants to just get started to participate, what kinds of policies, what national conditions seem to actually help make that happen? What opens that initial door? Are we talking pushing demand, supporting supply?
Well, it's usually about a strategic mix of policies. The paper groups them into three main types. You can think of it like this. First, demand-side policies. This is the government basically creating a market, making people want the green tech.
How?
Subsidies, yeah, or government buying it themselves, public procurement, or maybe big investments in infrastructure like strengthening the grid, that pulls demand.
Right.
Second, supply-side policies. This is about building up the local capacity, the muscle.
Okay.
So maybe financial incentives for local companies, support for startups in the green space, sometimes even protecting the local market a bit initially. And third, technology policies. This is more about sowing the seeds for the future. Innovation.
R&D funding.
R&D funding, yeah.
Right.
Tech transfer programs, helping local firms absorb new knowledge, setting standards. Now, what's really interesting and maybe a bit hopeful is the research shows that initial participation, it can actually happen even if a country doesn't have super strong existing conditions, like a weak industrial base, maybe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if they use demand or supply policies smartly. For deployment, look at Argentina. They had this program, Renovar, used fiscal incentives, basically tax breaks, to kickstart solar and wind. And boom, domestic firms quickly got involved in building major plants.
Right.
Or Egypt. They used feed-in tariffs, guaranteed prices, and auction systems. That created such strong demand for solar that local firms got pulled into these huge projects like the massive Benban solar park.
So the government basically creates the market, acts as a big buyer, and local firms jump in. Makes sense for deployment. What about manufacturing? Is it the same story?
For manufacturing participation, you see kind of similar patterns, but maybe with a twist. Colombia's solar PV sector, for instance.
Yeah.
You had domestic firms starting to assemble imported components. Why? Mainly because of demand-side policies. Again, things like exemptions from VAT and import duties made it cheaper to bring in the parts to assemble locally.
Okay, so still demand-driven, but focused on making assembly cheaper.
Right. But then look at South Africa's biomass sector. It was also demand-driven, but they still relied heavily on importing the high-value components. It shows demand alone doesn't instantly create high-value local making.
Yeah.
But then you have Indonesia's biomass sector. They focus more on the supply side initially. Use things like local content requirements rules, saying a certain percentage must be made locally and encourage joint ventures. That helped foster local participation in supplying components, even if it started at that lower value assembly stage. So these examples, they really show how a strategic policy push, tailored correctly, can get a country into the game one way or another.
Okay, so getting in the door is possible with smart policies, maybe simpler policies sometimes. But like you said, the real prize is upgrading, moving up that value chain. What does that upgrading actually look like in practice in these green chains? And what does it really take to get there? Because it sounds harder.
It is significantly harder and much less common than just participation. Upgrading involves a real leap in capability. So in the deployment chain, what does it look like? It means becoming a lead project developer, maybe handling the whole EPC engineering, procurement, construction side of things, or even expanding internationally, managing projects abroad.
Okay, moving beyond just local installation.
Exactly. And for manufacturing, upgrading means moving way beyond basic assembly. It's producing the high-value components yourself, like advanced solar cells or complex gearbox parts for wind turbines, or even manufacturing complete systems and then exporting those systems globally.
That's a big jump.
Huge jump, which naturally raises the crucial question. What are the absolute, indispensable conditions needed to make that kind of leap? What's non-negotiable?
Let's break it down again by chain. First, upgrading and deployment. What's the recipe for success there, according to the research?
Right. For deployment, upgrading, becoming that lead developer, maybe going international, the research points very clearly to needing a full package. Think of it like building a really solid house. You absolutely need the foundation and the frame. Those are the core conditions.
Okay, the essentials.
Yes. And here, those core conditions are strong existing sector preconditions, like having skilled engineers, good infrastructure already, and targeted technology policies. Things like country preconditions, market size, maybe, and general demand and supply policies. They're important, yes, but they play a complementary role. More like the plumbing and wiring, necessary for a functioning house, but they don't work without that core structure.
So demand policy might get you started, but it's not enough to really upgrade in deployment.
Exactly. It can initiate participation, create the initial market pull, but it won't get you to that lead developer status on its own. Look at India's solar PV sector. A great example. They had early demand-side policies, sure, like the National Solar Mission, which included some R&D incentives. But the real shift towards upgrading, from around 2015 onwards, technology policy became the core driver.
How specifically?
They used things like viability gap funding, basically subsidies to make projects financially feasible, concessional loans. They used competitive bidding processes designed to encourage learning by doing. They invested heavily in specific skill development programs, like the Surya Mitra Initiative for solar technicians. And crucially, research institutions like the IITs were deeply involved in technology diffusion, training engineers.
Building on what they already had.
Precisely. Building on India's existing engineering strengths, its infrastructure base. And that allowed firms like Tata Power Solar to not just dominate domestically, but expand internationally. You see a similar pattern in China's biomass for electricity sector. State-funded demonstration projects, active technology transfer, that enabled firms like Everbright International to become lead developers and expand across Southeast Asia. It's that powerful combination. Existing sector capabilities plus focused technology support.
That really highlights how deliberate and targeted you need to be for deployment upgrading.
Yeah.
But manufacturing, as you said, often seen as the bigger prize, maybe the tougher nut to crack. What makes that leap so much harder, and what combination of factors does it really take?
Yeah. Manufacturing upgrading is definitely seen as more challenging, and guess what? It also requires that full package, a complete set of conditions working together. Interestingly, things like country preconditions having a decent-sized domestic market, for example, and strong demand policies, they seem necessary for this kind of upgrading. You likely won't get there without them.
Okay, so they're table stakes, almost.
Kind of, yeah. But the core conditions, the absolute foundation and frame for manufacturing upgrading, again, it comes down to robust sector preconditions, existing manufacturing skills, supplier networks, and those targeted technology policies. The others are vital supports, but these are the core drivers. Turkey's solar PV sector is a good illustration. They use what the paper calls adaptive technology policies, things like anti-dumping tariffs on imported solar modules to protect local nascent producers.
Oh.
And they had differentiated feed-in tariffs, meaning you got paid more for your solar power if you used domestically manufactured components.
A direct incentive for local parts.
Exactly. And these policies deliberately nurtured Turkey's existing sectoral strengths. They protected the home market and stimulated local R&D. And that's what pushed Turkish firms beyond just assembling imported bits to actually producing higher value components and even starting to export them. An even more powerful example, China's wind industry back in the early 2000s.
Right, they moved incredibly fast.
They did. And a key policy was mandating a 70% local content requirement for wind turbine components used in domestic projects. 70%.
Wow, that's aggressive.
Very. And they coupled that with absolutely massive R&D subsidies, think programs like the famous 863 program plus tax breaks, huge investment in training engineers and technicians. This combination just supercharged manufacturing upgrading. Local firms like Goldwyn grew incredibly fast. And here's the really smart strategic part. Once those domestic firms became globally competitive around 2009, China actually removed those strict local content rules.
Remove them? Why?
To push them further, to force them to innovate more, to compete directly on the global stage without protection, driving export competitiveness. It shows policy isn't static. It has to evolve as the industry matures.
So, okay, let's try and connect all this to the bigger picture for you, listening in. What are the really big takeaways here for policymakers in these middle-income countries? Sure, but also just for anyone trying to grasp this huge global green shift.
Well, one thing that seems to jump out from the research is this potentially overlooked entry point,
Yeah.
the deployment chain. Why is starting there maybe more significant than we often think? Yeah, that's a huge takeaway. Deployment activities, installation, operations, maintenance, they often have significantly lower barriers to entry compared to complex manufacturing.
Easier to get started.
Much easier, generally. Which means profitable business opportunities can pop up relatively quickly for local firms. And governments play this absolutely crucial role as market creators, especially through public procurement, buying the green power themselves. Because remember, deployment is geographically sticky, tied to local infrastructure.
Right.
So for many developing countries, this can actually become the main entry point for broader industrial development. You start with deployment, build skills, build local companies, and that can lead to what the paper calls an organic functional expansion. Local firms gradually move up the value chain, leveraging the experience they gain in those initial, maybe lower value deployment stages.
Interesting. Building capabilities step by step.
Exactly, and the policy mix needed to just enter via deployment can sometimes be simpler. Maybe just strong demand-side policies can kick things off. But that said, it becomes way more effective if you combine it with supply-side measures too, especially if your starting conditions are a bit weak.
Okay, so deployment is a key potential starting ramp. What about the tougher transition, getting into serious manufacturing?
Yeah, that requires more patience. It needs long-term industrial development strategies. You have to actively nurture those dynamic preconditions, the skills, the suppliers, the innovation capacity. Now, supply-side policies, like those local content requirements we talked about, they can sometimes act as a sort of crutch, a substitute, if your sector preconditions are initially weak. They can help firms get that first foothold in manufacturing participation.
Buying them time to build up.
Kind of, yeah. But, and this is maybe the single most important finding the research is absolutely crystal clear. Technology policies are indispensable for upgrading, period, in both chains.
Indispensable.
Completely. They augment deployment upgrading, helping firms go from basic installation to lead developer. And they are a fundamental requirement for manufacturing upgrading. You just don't see manufacturing upgrading without strong tech policy.
So what does that mean in practice? R&D again?
R&D subsidies, yes, but also developing robust standard certification systems so buyers trust your products, and really fostering deep collaboration between universities and industry, building that capacity to absorb new knowledge, adapt it, and ultimately innovate.
So putting it all together, what does this tell us about the whole idea of green industrial policy itself? How should governments be thinking about their role?
I think the biggest takeaway is forget any notion of a pure free market driving this transition, especially in the early stages. It just doesn't work that way for green tech. These markets are, as the paper puts it, highly governed. Why? Because they're dealing with public goods, essentially climate mitigation, reliable energy, essential infrastructure.
Right. Things the market alone doesn't always provide optimally.
Exactly. So the state isn't just another player, it's often the architect of the market, actively setting the targets, shaping the rules, influencing demand and supply. Therefore, policies can't be generic. They must be carefully tailored. Aligned with the specific characteristics of that particular value chain. Manufacturing is different from deployment, solar different from wind. And aligned with local circumstances, what are your existing strengths and weaknesses? While always keeping an eye on the global picture, the international competition, we really need to distinguish between what the paper calls the indispensable drivers, those core conditions like tech policy for upgrading that you absolutely must have, and the auxiliary levers, those peripheral conditions that offer flexibility or can amplify the effects of the core drivers. It's a much more nuanced strategic game, a chess game really, not just rolling the dice with one or two policies.
Wow. This deep dive has really laid out how navigating the green economy isn't simple. It's this complex strategic dance, isn't it? Between a country's existing strengths, its preconditions, and the deliberate policy choices it makes. We've seen these distinct paths for getting in participation and moving up, upgrading in both manufacturing and deployment chains, and underscored that absolutely critical role of tailored industrial policies, demand, supply, and especially, it seems, technology policy interacting with those national sectoral conditions. Now, while this research gives us some really powerful, actionable insights, it is, as you suggested, kind of a static snapshot, right? A picture at a point in time. Future research presumably needs to dig into the dynamics, the sequencing of policies over time, how these pieces evolve together.
Absolutely. Understanding that dynamic sequencing, when to introduce which policy, how to adapt them as the industry grows, that's the next frontier, really. But this framework gives us a fantastic starting point. So maybe as you, listening, think about the future of global energy, here's something to mull over. How do the specific policy choices being made today, right now, in developing these green technologies, how are they shaping the economic landscapes of tomorrow? Not just for individual companies, but for entire nations. And how might that success or failure, in turn, influence innovation and opportunity far beyond their own borders?
That's a really powerful thought to leave us with, how today's green policy choices ripple outwards. We definitely encourage you to reflect on these principles, the tailored policies, the strategic entry points, that crucial need for continuous upgrading, and think about how it might apply to other emerging technologies or economic challenges you encounter. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.